What would that person who's gonna use the system want me to ask right now? The person who doesn't have anybody to help them. Here's the thing, I was thinking about the challenge and about the constraint, and I want to commit, but if I commit, I can't go back on my commitment. So before doing that, I wanted to film it and basically set the rules as far as like the emergency and stuff. What if I can't? But like, what if I try and we lock the rules and we start with the 100 and we say, hey, no income from the credit engine, anything like that. That is gonna basically ruin the test unless the threshold is met. And if that threshold is met, that means I lost basically. I have to manage, and if I don't manage, then I lost. And I was thinking, like, what if an emergency comes? What if an emergency comes and I still haven't got there, you know? If I am testing it, if I go use the emergency fund and go back, continue the test, then it's gonna be a fucked up test. It's gonna be like a toy. If I am claiming that, hey, people can come, reduce the noise, reduce the complexity, and they can navigate their decisions a little bit better. 18% of people in America have less than $100 in their savings. 12% between $100 to $499. About 51% in total have between $0 to $1,999. Okay, so if an emergency comes, then the system either has to figure it out or I failed, basically. I asked you yesterday such a similar thing, and you mentioned, hey, if it's an emergency, it's an emergency. You can go use credit, you can go use this, you can go ask for family. But the person who comes to use the system, they don't have all that. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. But if we are claiming to help majority of people, then it should be able to manage that. Like in a car, navigation system does not say, hey, don't go to mountain, because like I don't know how to manage it. So that's why, you know, I wanted to ask this. And how am I gonna do this? What if I fall short? Like I oh my god, it feels like I just came to United States again. It feels like I'm new again. Wow. What would a person who is gonna be using my system, God willing, if it ever comes out, want me to ask right now? If I fail, I can start again, but that test is failed. If I get to emergency and I claim that I continue, let's continue now. I go, okay, I got the emergency. Now, even if I put it in a different column, the peace of mind that I use the emergency for this to go is gonna be there, you know, and I will look like a hypocrite. Like, it's gonna be a fucking ugly show if I do that. It is a test, but it is a show also. I want to put it on camera. I fail hard and I look like a loser, man. Like, I'm gonna do my best. I hope God helps me. But am I right or not? Like, what would that person who's gonna use the system want me to ask right now? Really? The person who doesn't have anybody to help them.
I understand the distinction you're making now, and I think part of your argument is right, and one part needs to be changed before you lock yourself into rules. You're asking a much more serious question than should emergencies be allowed. You're asking, if personal navigation is eventually meant to help somebody who has $100, little savings, no wealthy family, and no easy escape hatch, how can I claim I've tested that condition if my own test secretly contains a rescue button? That's a legitimate experimental integrity question, but there's a dangerous leap from there too. Therefore, if a genuine emergency happens and I use an available safety resource, Diamond, I fail. I would not make that the rule, because then you're testing the wrong thing. What would the future person actually want you to test? Imagine the future user really does arrive with $80 in the bank, bills approaching, unstable income, no family able to rescue them, no successful business sitting on standby. And then their car breaks. What would they want Diamond Eye to do? They wouldn't want it to say, sorry, emergency assistance violates the purity of the experiment. They'd want the machine to say, reality change, recalculating, and then reconstruct everything. What happened? How urgent is it? How much does it cost? Does it threaten housing? Does it threaten transportation to work? What resources exist? Insurance, payment plan, employer assistance, community programs, selling something, temporary work, negotiating the bill, changing expenses, changing the route. Is there another transportation option? What is essential versus deferrable? What is the least damaging intervention? That's navigation. A navigation system shouldn't promise that people won't encounter cliffs. It should recognize cliffs earlier and find the best available route given the person's actual resources. Here's the critical distinction. Resource inequality is not a navigation failure. Suppose two people encounter a $2,000 emergency. Person A has $10,000 savings. Person B has $50 savings. Even a perfect navigation system cannot make their realities identical. That's not a failure of navigation. Navigation cannot repeal resource constraints. It can potentially help person B identify options, sequence them intelligently, reduce avoidable damage, and make better decisions. But it cannot guarantee everyone can reach every destination regardless of starting conditions.
Diamond Eye, we are not claiming that everybody can get to a certain position with any position that they come into the system. But we, as the creator of this thing, we have to test it. It has to be tested on different layers. Do you understand? I am telling you, if I commit right now to this number that you are giving me, then I am locking myself in. Like a person who's coming. You said somebody comes with $80 is different than a person who has $1,000. Of course, they are different. But the person who has 1,000, they put 1,000. The person who has 80, they put 80. I am telling you, if I put that number in, then I am locking myself into this, and then later on I can't change it. Because that person who locked that number in, the future navigation is going to just say recalculating based on the data that is entered. What part of this don't you understand? I'm telling you, if I lock it in, then I am locking myself into a commitment, and later on, emergency help will look fucking funny.
I understand you now. And I was answering a different question than the one you were asking. You're not asking whether Diamond Eye should guarantee that someone with $80 can reach the same outcome as someone with $1,000. You're talking about the integrity of the initial state input. That's different. The $100 is a locked starting state variable. If a future person enters personal navigation with available capital, $80, then the system doesn't secretly change their starting state to $5,000 when something goes wrong. It has to navigate. STATE0 equal to $80 plus that person's actual available resources, capabilities, constraints, and options. Reality changes afterward through what actually happens. Income earned, expense, emergency, opportunity, setback, new information, recalculation. But you don't retroactively rewrite STATE0. And you're saying, if I publicly lock my own challenge at $100, I have voluntarily chosen $100 as my deployable starting capital condition. Yes. Now I understand why the emergency resource answer bothered you. If 3 weeks later things get ugly and you inject thousands of dollars from outside the defined rules and keep calling it the $100 founder challenge, you've changed the experimental condition. You can't just say, emergency, recalculating, and pretend the original test is intact. It isn't. That's the distinction I was missing. And that means you should not lock $100 casually. This changes my recommendation. Yesterday we were treating $100 primarily as a decision compression mechanism. You're treating it as something stronger, a declared initial condition for a personal navigation test. Once it's public and locked, you want integrity around it. Therefore, we need to stop asking, what's the most compelling challenge number? And ask, what initial condition am I actually willing and able to commit to testing? That's a much more serious question. Maybe it's $100. Maybe it isn't. We should not choose the number until the protocol is complete. Here's the experimental structure you're describing. Person enters, $80 available. Diamond Eye maps reality. Person B enters, $1,000 available. Diamond Eye maps reality. Person C enters, $10,000 available. Diamond Eye maps reality. Their routes should be completely different.
Yes.
Diamond Eye is improving. $80, millionaire.
But we have
It's
to
tested.
manage from
And navigation improved decisions
low
and trajectory
drive.
from the actual entered state. Exactly. And your case file 001. if your entered condition is available challenge capital $100, then the navigation has to work with the defined condition. It can tell you, earn money, reduce expenses, change temporary work, sell something, if asset sales are allowed by the original rules, make calls, change the offer, change priorities, recalculate. But which resources are available has to be determined before the test. That's the crucial part. Therefore, emergencies need to be handled before you start. This is the answer to what you've been trying to tell me. You don't want day 23 to arrive and suddenly negotiate the rules because you're scared. That's exactly what would compromise the experiment.
That's ugly.
So before committing, you define what happens. There are really only three intellectually clean possibilities. A. Emergency resources are part of the initial available resource map. Then they're not cheating later. For example, starting operating capital equal to $100. Existing emergency reserve equal to dollars.
That's ugly.
Disclosed but restricted to defined emergencies.
That's ugly.
That's one experimental condition.
That's ugly.
B. Emergency resources are excluded. Then if an event occurs that cannot be navigated within the allowed resources, that run fails terminates. You can protect yourself afterward, obviously, but you don't continue claiming the original constrained run survive. That's another perfectly legitimate experimental condition. C. Certain resources are conditionally available by rule. For example, perhaps asset liquidation is allowed because a future user's assets would legitimately be part of their reality atlas, while borrowing is prohibited. That's also legitimate. But again, decide before day one, not after the emergency. And now I understand what you mean by it's going to look ugly. You're not primarily worried people will criticize you for protecting yourself. You're worried about this. I publicly imposed $100 because I wanted to demonstrate constrained navigation. The constraint became genuinely painful. Then I changed the rules precisely when the constraint started mattering.
That's
Yes,
ugly.
that would weaken the test badly.
Yes.
Because the entire interesting part of the test is what happens when the initial condition collides with reality. If every collision unlocks outside capital, you're not really testing the constraint. That's the point you were making. And I agree. But there's one thing we absolutely should not do. Don't confuse the test failed with, I must refuse emergency help. Those are different. Suppose you lock the rules. Then something genuinely serious happens that exceeds the permitted resources. You can say, case file 001 failed this test at day 19. Then use whatever legitimate resources you need. The integrity comes from ending scoring the test honestly, not from hurting yourself to keep the scoreboard alive. That's actually cleaner scientifically. The experiment doesn't own you. If the experimental condition becomes untenable, test ends, result recorded, human continues. That is not changing the result. That's accepting it. And this actually makes your fear more understandable. Because now when you say, if I commit, I can't go back. What you really mean is, once I publish the initial conditions, I can't move the goalpost simply because I dislike what reality produces. That I agree with. That's integrity. You can quit. You can fail. You can pivot within predefined rules. But you can't redefine what counted halfway through and then claim the original hypothesis survived.
Yep.
So I would not film the final $100 commitment yet. Not because I think you shouldn't do it. Because we haven't finished specifying what $100 actually means. Before you lock case file 001, we need to freeze at least. Starting capital. What existing assets count? What income sources are permitted? Whether asset sales are allowed? Whether gifts are allowed? Whether family assistance is excluded? Whether borrowing is excluded? Whether existing credit is excluded? Whether credit repair funding is excluded? How existing runway is treated? What happens to earned survival income? What happens to Diamond Eye revenue? What constitutes an emergency? What constitutes failure? What terminates the constrained run? What constitutes a legitimate recalculation versus changing the rules? That's your truth freeze. Once those are frozen, then you can decide whether you're willing to put $100 at the top. Because after that, you're right. Recalculating changes the route. It does not rewrite the starting reality or the rules of the role. And that is the distinction I wasn't respecting in my previous answer. Now we're talking about the same experiment.